I'm Ruth Molman with the Farmington Hills Historic District Commission, and I'm here with Dick Carvell from Farmington, who we consider our Mr. History for the things that he has done for the Historical Museum. And then I found out when we were visiting one day that he has a very, very interesting background as a serviceman during the war, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that. And I'm here now with Mr. Carvell, with Dick.
Hi, Ruth.
Now tell us about what it was like. You were living.
Well, all right. Well, mine is not what you'd call very illustrious, but it was rear echelon. I happened to be. I waited around and got drafted in February of 1943. And previous to that, I had already started working for Michigan Bell, so that when I went down to Camp Grant at Rockford, Illinois, they asked me what service would you like to be in? What would be your preference? And I said, well, Air Corps or the Signal Corps. So I ended up in the Signal Company, attached to eventually, which was the 9th Air Forces when we finally got to Europe. But it was back in those days. It was well, it kind of, I guess, my experience was typical. Things had grown so fast that here I was in the Air Force, and for basic training, I spent my time down in Atlantic City in February and March, which was not the best time to be there, but we had to go to the convention center, and that's where they would showed us how to pitch pup tents and a few things like that. And I can remember the day that they were our only experience with rifle training. They took us out on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, and the wind was blowing so that the sand was so fierce. We had to put gas masks on to protect our face. I think we ended up shooting 5 shells or 5 shots, and that was my rifle training.
Oh God!
And as they say, being in Atlantic City in February and March was a little different. The fog was so thick. Of course, the boardwalk, we could hear other outfits or training drilling back and forth. You could hear them, but you couldn't see them. And it got they got so that the temperature got down around 15 or 10 or 15. They'd never let us go outside because of the chance of frostbite with all the moisture. And it was a little bit different than the fellows that were doing basic training in some place where they had. Anyway, then, so that's, I put in a couple, I think it was only about 6 weeks, really, is about all the basic training supposedly I had. And at that time, then, they just sent me up the coast a little ways, up to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And that was where the main signal school for the Army was at that time, so I was at Fort Monmouth for about 6 months and taking various trainings. And it was kind of odd because I got trained for a specialty dealing with homing devices and so on, that for working with fighter planes and so on. And of course, I never did get set up on it. I think all the time I was in Europe, I spent one day. I was at near Oxford, and they brought in a group of just young pilots. And actually what they were doing was testing out a runway, because things were moving so fast that they would throw down a runway, and basically what it was, they would just spread straw and put tar paper over it.
And they could
instead of being a concrete runway or something, that was what they were using for fighter planes. And so
they could take off from that?
Yeah.
Oh,
and this one particular day, that we had a school set up. I was teaching some fellows that were working with it. We were teaching them, and this group was in there flying in and out, and all of a sudden there had been a big explosion, and the major started running down through to make sure it wasn't one of his planes that had blown up. As it turned out, it was a British Mosquito plane, which were made of plywood, and this had been on a night reconnaissance that had gone over. Something he must have gotten hit, because it got back within about 3 miles of our base and blew up. The biggest part we found was a wheel unit.
Oh.
So a few things. But it,
Did the pilots get out, or?
no, I don't think so, no.
Oh.
Never really heard too much on that. That was, because we just went out to, we took off on our own to go and look, see what was going on. But,
Did you ever use those rifles?
no, I carried a gun. Back by the time I got around to go overseas, they gave us carbines. I think they gave us 45 rounds of ammunition, and as far as I knew, when I still had the same 45 rounds to turn in when I left, I never did fire anything. There was a couple times when they were going to, because as I say, being rear echelon, a couple times that they were going to try to make soldiers out of us, but it didn't work out that way. But I'll get to that when we get down. I guess I'll kind of talking as things went along, is because after being in Atlantic City, and then went to Fort Monmouth for school, and then it was along about September that we were supposedly finished with our schooling, and they sent us south. Well, there was 16 of us, and for some reason, they sent us to Mobile, Alabama. We were supposed to be in New Orleans, and I don't quite, we never did quite figure out. It took them a month to get the records straightened out to get us over to New Orleans. And Mobile, Alabama, my recollection of that was a good place to volunteer to be on KP, because you could get the food while it was still raw, and it was better than it was when they cooked it. That was not my ideal of a base, but anyway, then we finally did get over to New Orleans, and we got assigned to different companies, and they were about ready to. This would have been in October, and they were about ready to getting ready to ship overseas. So I had never had any furlough, so they did send me home for 10 days for furlough, which was very nice, because during that period to home I did meet my future wife. I had known Claire, or known of her. She had lived in Grand Ledge, and I had a cousin lived there that had known her and had been in school there. And I was up there visiting one time. He took me over to introduce me to her, but she wasn't home, so I never did meet her until then she went to Western, and when she graduated, she went to Vicksburg to be a teacher. And when I went home in October, I had to, of course, show the new girl around town, so on. So anyway, we got acquainted.
She must have been very impressed with this tall
Either
soldier came and got her.
There weren't many fellows around. Anyway, we spent a lot of email back and forth with letters and so on. Anyway, then I went overseas in about December of 43, and I remember one of the stories they told us that we were in a convoy, and you think you don't feel kind of lonesome. We were in the extreme outside back row. I think there was only one boat in behind us.
Wow.
And except that there was a bunch of little Canadian destroyers that, of course, there was a big storm. It was one of the worst storms they'd had in December in the Atlantic, and these boats would bob up and down. You'd see them every once in a while. And of course, we were sitting out there and back and forth all the time, and I spent most of the time in bed. I was sick, I'm telling you. Talk about being seasick. I was glad I had some friends that were on KP that would bring me oranges.
They didn't have Dramamine then, did they?
If they did, they didn't. They weren't passing it out to any of us. And as they say, that boat was always turning all the time. And we were down on the bottom deck. And I think we were right on top of the propeller, because every time we turned, the bunks would shake. It was another experience, just one more thing to talk about.
They want thousands of dollars now to take a trip on the Atlantic.
Yeah. Well, then, as I say, I went to England, and we were supposed to go into the Firth of Clyde, which was the inlet to Glasgow. Well, we were supposed to go, and they were going to unload us by boat. Well, then something opened up, so they took us clear up into Glasgow, right up to took us off at the main deck, and then put us on a train and started us south down to Bath, England. And that was interesting too. But anyway.
Did you get to see Bath?
Oh yeah. I saw more of it when I went back in '71 and '78 than I did when I was there, but of course at that time, you know, I was a kid, what, 20 years old. I was interested in history, but wasn't smart enough to take advantage of what was right there next door to me, but, you know, yeah, that, I spent time there in that, and it was kind of funny because they called it Charmy Downs, but it was up on top of a hill.
Oh.
When Claire and I went back to England in 1971, I had stopped in Bath and at a tourist location and asked if they knew where this Charmy Down was. Well, it just happened to be that it turned out in talking with the girls in there, they were all just a bunch of young high school girls. But about 2 weeks before, somebody had come in and asked the same question. So they got busy and looked up, they knew just where to tell me where to go. So, and we went out north of town where it was at, and I still didn't see anything and looked familiar. And we pulled into a turnoff, and it was a young kid selling raspberries. So we figured, well, we'll buy some raspberries to eat. I asked him if he knew anything about where this base had been, and his mother, who had to be in the front seat, says, yeah, just turn around, and there was a water tower. And her dad had been a construction man and helped build it, and the only thing that was still left was the water tower. I didn't go back over to it, but I did get that close to where it had been up there on top of this place.
Was it a subdivision at that point, or?
It had reverted back to farms. They headed back into farmland.
Why did they call it Downs?
That just seems to be their, I don't know, I'm not just sure what how they nomenclature of it, but it was as they say, it was Charmy Downs, but it was up on top of a hill, so I never could quite figure out the English. You got a different way of looking at things than we do.
It's kind of fun sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And then from there, we moved up to, up near Oxford, a little place called Kingston Bagpews, which just happened to be here again. They'd taken over farmland and put in a base, and where the building that I was in was just about 5 or 6 buildings from the edge of the base, and which was a small bakery there. So we'd go down and buy this big dark bread, and of course our folks had been sending us cheese and so on, so we had lots of snacking. And then when Claire and I were back over there in '78, I had never been able to find this place on a map. It just happened to be, we went into Oxford. I know Oxford, for some reason, didn't impress us very much, so we were gonna go back over someplace else to stay that night. And lo and behold, I drove by the sign that said Kingston Bagpews. So we turned, so the next morning we came back, and the daughter of the folks who had owned the bakery, she still had it. Plus she also now was the postmistress for that area, so she told me how to get back around. So I went back around to where the base had been, and it was all reverted back to farmland again. So that, and just the way with things that happened on D-Day, I had gone down to London. I'd had a 24-hour pass and gone down to London, and so I was in London on D-Day.
Oh, that must have been fun.
Yeah, well, part of it was had to dodge the MPs because the word was out that if you were over 25 miles from your base, you were supposed to go back to your base. Well, of course I was, but as it turned out, there was an airfield called Kingston right outside of London. So we told them that we were from Kingston, and forgot the Bagpews. So anyway, while we were going back that night, it was to try to horse around to try to find transportation. Would have been kind of a headache. So, but the biggest thing I remember that night going back, I think the sky was just black with all the troop carriers and stuff coming back. I mean, it just kind of you get an idea of how much was going on over there.
Well, we're going to take a little break now, and we'll be back with Dick Carvell after this break and more of his adventures in Europe during the war.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ed, our company's new president.
That reminds me of how President William Henry Harrison, 9th American president, caught a cold on Inauguration Day. 31 days later, boom, dead.
It's fun to know history.
Completely dead.
Find curious facts from America's past at loc.gov, the Library of Congress website.
We're back with Dick Carvell, and we're going to be talking about the experiences in the service in World War II, some of our war heroes.
Well, as I say, I was in London on D-Day, but so then as it turned out, our outfit, we went across to Omaha Beach on D+39. And of course, as it turned out, we were a rear echelon for the 9th Air Force, which was fighter bombers. So as the idea was that when they got started, and the bombers or the fighters would be like well up next to the front lines, and we'd be behind them. Then as the front moved, we would leapfrog them and go up, and we would be right behind the front lines. And rather than everybody moving twice, they'd just have us move once. And of course, it moved fast because, as I say, we went over on D+39. We had to wait for them to make sure that they had Cherbourg cleaned out. We had the Germans out there, so we were in Cherbourg, and we had a company commander that had, he was a French Jew, so he had some contacts, and he somehow or other he ended up getting us it wasn't a high-class chateau, but we lived in a chateau for a while. That was a little different.
You deserved it.
Yeah. Of course, my cot was, I took 4 boards and used telephone wire and made the frame and wired the wire back and forth to make a cot. We couldn't get cots, so rather than sleeping on the floor, I slept on my wire bed. But one thing, at that time, of course, the minute the guys get someplace, they all start out to explore. And we found by walking over a small hill that there was a farm there that we could get milk. And I said, oh, I'd love to get in on that. So, except when it was my turn to go, and I got there and saw the sanitation facilities, I said, no thanks, I'll I didn't particularly care for any more. I guess I was a little too used to what was happening back in the United States with, they were, getting into milkers and the big glass tubing and all that. It was a long ways from the glass tubing over there.
It wasn't pasteurized?
No, just raw milk.
Oh boy. Did you have any problems with it?
No, I don't think any of us had any problems, but I just decided that I wasn't going to try it either. That was one experience I'd just soon leave out. And after spending a little time in Cherbourg and things, they were going to try to recover the Brittany Peninsula, so they moved us down to Rennes, and we were living in tents, but the Germans had been down there, and they'd had prefabricated buildings, so we tore most of their buildings down and used the walls for flooring, so they were nicely insulated, and so on. And then of course, as I say, things kept moving so fast. I was in Paris 7 days after it was liberated. They moved us up to Villers-Coblet airfield, so we'd work like Dickens in the morning and head for Paris in the afternoon to see what trouble we could stay out of.
How did they respond to the Americans in Paris at that time?
Well, they were glad to see us. I think one of the things that, as I've looked back on it, I can see why. One weekend in Paris, and I don't know, we got talking with a young Frenchman, he probably was 25 years old. I mean, most of us were, 20, 21 at that time. And he said, well, we'll be fighting the Germans again in another 30 years. And I thought, what an attitude. I mean, here you're just getting liberated, but when you stop and think history-wise, they did about every 30, 40 years. The French and the Germans did fight. And, of course, it's been a lot longer than that now, but I can see the attitude they had. It was a different attitude than what we were used to, and
they ganged up on us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, and so then for a while, as I say, we were in Paris wasn't too long, but then things here again kept moving. So now they moved us up to Liège, Belgium. At that time, they were still fighting in Aachen, which was only about 16 miles away. That's what I say. They moved us right up close to the front. And we were in there during the breakthrough, and that's when, at one time when they were going to try to make a soldier out of me, our orders were that when the German breakthrough, and looked like we were gonna get cut off, we were under a 24-hour watch. We could have 18 hours to move our equipment out and get ourselves out, and then there was a group of us that were supposed to stay there for another 6 hours and blow up equipment so it wouldn't fall in the hands of the Germans. Well, none of us had ever been trained to be demolition experts. I don't know when they were gonna train us, but thank
Right
goodness,
then.
thank goodness we didn't have to. I think that was one time when I was very glad to see the General Montgomery with his tank outfit, his desert rats. They were up in Holland, and they brought them down through to establish a defense line there between us and the Germans that were there in the when that breakthrough. And that was also during the time when the Germans started throwing in what they called the buzz bombs.
Ooh.
They were what they were called V1s. They were just a small, a rocket-powered plane that was, and they set with just how much fuel. And a lot of them, we kind of figured there was about 3 tracks that was sent over Liège, because there was 3 different, where the planes came through it. And one of them came right over the building that we were in, because I remember the first one that come close to us. This fellow, Bill Domolewski, and I operated over there almost like I did when I got back here in the United States, as far as we were the troubleshooters for the telephones, and we had our own truck, and so we could kind of go as we saw fit. And we got back, and we just pulled into our parking lot, and we heard this buzz bomb, and we heard it cut out, and we said, "Oh!" And we both dove for underneath the truck. As it turned out, the buzz bomb kind of fell off on its left wing and hit down at the bottom of the hill and cleaned out some houses. But there was quite a few of those that were dropped, and that was before they started the V2s that they sent across to England. But so there was a few things going on that we never really got involved in fighting, but there was a few things that kept reminding us that there was a war going on.
At that time, now, the telephones were all on wires, were
Yeah.
they not?
Yeah, and this was kind of interesting, because in Liège, one of the things that we would generally set up would be a telephone central for all the units and stuff into it. And we originally there in Liège, we'd taken over somebody's, I don't know, little garage or something, and we finally found a building downtown that it was only about a block or 2 from the telephone office, and they pulled a special cable into us. The Belgians, the cables were all brought into the basement, and when the Germans left, they had blown up a lot of that. Well, come to find out, the Belgians had another floor below that.
Oh.
That's where everything had come in, actually, which nobody knew about. So that, and anyway, and of course, the telephone, a lot of it was on towers. There was steel or wooden towers, and they used open wire to go from, like, off of this house, go down to somebody's house, rather than being pretty much like you used to have here in the country. And so you'd have these towers that we'd have to go up into, and then find the 2 wires that went down to the building that we wanted to go to, or sometimes, of course, it's fairly hilly, so that maybe it'd come down and touch the top of this building and go on to the next one. It was fun.
Were those wires charged, or?
Well, they had 48 volts DC, which was the standard telephone. There was nothing, you weren't gonna get hurt. It'd tickle you a little bit, but, oh, then of course, while we were there in Liège, that's when they got across the Rhine, which wasn't that far from us. So then we got moved up, and we were gonna go to a little place called Uerdingen, which had been a training base up in, it was up toward Berlin. I'm not just sure how far it was as far as mileage wise, but I know I was always generally was involved in the advance party, because anyway, so this particular day, our wire chief, he'd got a hold of a German map. The Americans in Moose Fest, they didn't have maps for us, so he had this German map, so we were reading a German map, trying to drive to where we were going to go. I was driving 3/4-ton Dodge weapons carrier. Pretty near missed a sign that said the bridge was out, pretty near drove off.
Oh,
Anyway, so we get into this one place, and the map showed us that we wanted to go through this woods. We asked this outfit, they said, is it safe to go through? He said, yeah, we think we got all the Germans out of there. So we drove up through there. Well, a couple days later, it was my turn to ride with the courier to come back to because we didn't have telephone lines established yet to bring messages back to Castle. And as we started down through there, some German civilians come up and attempted to talk to us. They were scared to death because apparently a group of Russians had been freed or got free, and they were terrorizing the German civilians, and they wanted protection. So we didn't want any part of that. But anyway, the next morning, coming back through right in that same area, they had roadblocks had been built in wood and built up wood, and just as we drove through one of those, a Smizer pistol, which was a German automatic gun, started, and boy, Ramey was the guy driving. He and I, we both looked for where to hide. Well, come to find out, during the night, a light tank outfit had moved in. These guys were just out there shooting these pistols off, and they weren't shooting at us, but
scary.
Yeah, I got a gray hair or two out of that one. But yeah, basically that's what it was. And then when the war ended, they were getting ready to send. They were going to take. When the war in Europe ended, they were going to take the flying personnel out of the 8th Air Force and tie them in with the ground troops like out of the 9th Air Force, and we were all supposed to go to Japan, and we were going to join a B-29 bomber outfit. But so anyway, I was on my way home when Japan quit, so I came home and for furlough, and then they extended 15 days and then kicked me out because they didn't need me anymore. So, but,
Then you got married and
well, eventually,
established a
yep.
family? I think there's one little story you must tell. And that is when they came to draft you, and they found, because of the name difference.
Oh, yeah, well, okay, yeah. Well, my grandfather's name was Charles, and of course, elderly, and I had always been very happy that they had started calling me by my middle name, Richard. And a couple of stories that got back when it was in the paper that Charles Carvell was being drafted, all the little old ladies said, Charlie Carvell, he's 82 years old. You know, it's a small town where everybody knows you.
It's,
Yeah, it's a little different.
yeah. They got the right Charles, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
That would
Yeah,
have,
I put in about 33 months, and I was lucky I got out. As I say, that things worked out, that I got out faster than I normally would have, but I guess the thing was over. There was no sense keeping us around. They didn't need us anymore.
they needed you here to
Yeah.
run the wires in.
Yeah, because when I come back to the telephone company, because I had been on installation, but by this time, everybody was crying for telephones, and so I got moved over onto construction and started putting up the cables so we could install telephones. But so,
You brought all that knowledge back, and
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
picked up a little bit over there. There's no question about that. It's been a lot of fun,
well,
one way or another.
thank you so much for coming and telling us about your war experiences. They were really special and unique, and you applied it here too. And you've been doing such a fantastic job with the history here in Farmington. It's been really
interesting.
worthwhile.
That was one thing I had to kind of, I guess it goes back to when I was in school in Vicksburg, because I had a shirt-tail relation that was kind of the historian of Vicksburg. So back in those days, they used to do a lot more with it. We had regular workbooks. And of course, I was always could get mine done the fastest, because all I had to do was go and talk to Ida Schaefer, and she gave me all the details. So I could really whip through that. I guess that kind of got me interested in history, so that when the chance came to get involved here, I did. So,
You've done a wonderful job with the museum. We're
yeah, thank you.
very pleased with the whole
Yeah.
thing. And thank you so much.
You're totally welcome.